the ocean's greatest predator. Rows of teeth, perfect killing machine. Every nature documentary told you that story. Here is what they left out. Great white sharks run from one animal, an animal with 0 teeth, 0 claws, and 0 interest in eating them. We're going to go deep into the science behind one of the ocean's strangest relationships. The terror, the size gap, the acoustic power, and the ancient instinct that overrides every shark instinct we thought we understood. If you enjoy this, like and subscribe. It genuinely helps. Prepare yourselves. We begin. Picture a great white shark, 600 pounds of muscle and instinct, suddenly turning and swimming the other direction as fast as it can. No attack, no circling, just gone. Marine biologists first caught this behaviour by accident. They were not studying fear. They were studying feeding patterns off the California coast, tagging great whites near the Farallon Islands, a cluster of rocky outcrops about 27 miles west of San Francisco. These islands sit on one of the richest stretches of ocean on the planet. Seals haul out on the rocks by the hundreds. Elephant seals, fat and slow, crowd the shoreline. For a great white, this place is basically an all-you-can-eat buffet. Then something strange kept showing up in the data. Every fall, when great whites should have been at peak feeding activity, some of them vanished from the area entirely. The tags kept transmitting. The sharks were alive. They had just left. And when researchers cross-referenced the timing, they found the same pattern repeating year after year. The sharks left around the same time the blue whales arrived. At first, scientists figured it was coincidence. Blue whales passed through that stretch of California coastline during their migration, following dense patches of krill. The overlap in timing seemed like it could just be seasonal noise. But the data kept pointing the same direction. When blue whales showed up, the sharks moved out. When the whales moved on, the sharks came back. One study tracked this over multiple years. Researchers found that after a blue whale entered the Farallon feeding zone, tagged great whites sometimes relocated more than 100 miles away. Not a short detour, a full exit. They abandoned territory they had been hunting in for weeks. That raised a serious question. Great white sharks are apex predators. They sit at the top of the ocean food chain. They have been doing this for millions of years. So what exactly were they detecting that triggered such a strong response? The answer starts with scale. Most people have heard that blue whales are big, but the numbers alone do not do it justice. A mature blue whale stretches up to 100 feet long. To picture that, lay 3 school buses end to end. That is roughly the length of one adult blue whale. It weighs as much as 33 elephants. Its heart alone is the size of a small car. A large great white shark reaches about 20 feet in length. Against a blue whale, it is the size of the whale's tail fin. Now here is what made scientists lean forward. This was not a situation where the blue whale was threatening the shark. Blue whales eat krill, tiny shrimp-like creatures they filter through massive plates in their mouths. A great white is completely outside their diet. The whale was not chasing the shark. The whale was barely even aware the shark existed. The fear moved in one direction only. And when researchers dug deeper into what a great white actually detects when a blue whale enters its range, they found something that goes way beyond just seeing a big animal and deciding to leave. The shark's entire sensory system gets hit at once. Something the whale does, something in the way it exists in the water, reaches the shark before the whale is even visible. And what comes next rewrites everything you thought you knew about how predators process the world around them. Stand next to a school bus. Now imagine 3 of them lined up bumper to bumper, stretching down the street in front of you. That line of buses is roughly the length of one adult blue whale, the largest animal that has ever lived on this planet. Bigger than any dinosaur we have ever found a skeleton of, and it is alive right now, swimming through the same ocean that great white sharks call home. The size gap between these 2 animals is so extreme that it barely registers as a fair comparison. A grown great white shark, one of the biggest on record, measured 23 feet long and weighed around 5,000 pounds. A blue whale regularly hits 100 feet and tips the scale at around 300,000 pounds. The math on that is almost impossible to feel without a picture. The blue whale outweighs the shark by roughly 60 to 1. To put it another way, a great white shark is to a blue whale what a golden retriever is to an elephant. That gap matters for a reason beyond the obvious. Size in the ocean does not just mean muscle, it means displacement, it means pressure waves, it means the amount of water an animal moves just by existing and swimming. A blue whale does not have to do anything aggressive to affect everything around it. It simply has to show up. When a blue whale swims at cruising speed, around 5 miles per hour, it pushes an enormous column of water in front of it, and to the sides. That displacement creates a physical force field around the animal. Smaller fish get pushed sideways, currents shift. The water itself reorganizes around the whale's body like traffic parting for a truck on a highway. A great white shark moving through that zone feels this before it sees anything. Its lateral line, a pressure-sensing system running along both sides of its body, picks up the displacement like a wall of pressure arriving from a distance. Scientists who study shark sensory biology describe it as similar to a sound hitting you from a speaker turned up too loud. The signal is so strong it becomes uncomfortable. But here is where it gets stranger. Scientists noticed that the reaction was strongest in sharks that were actively hunting. A shark in patrol mode, cruising without a specific target, showed a milder response. A shark locked into a hunting sequence, body tense, focused on a seal colony, would break off completely and leave. The working explanation is behavioral economics. A predator mid-hunt has its nervous system dialed up. Every sense is sharp. When that dialed-up system gets slammed with a massive pressure signal from an animal 60 times its own size, the brain does a fast calculation. Risk versus reward. And the reward of whatever seal or fish it was chasing does not come close to balancing the risk signal, coming from something that size. The shark does not analyze the whale. It does not figure out that the whale eats krill and poses no direct threat. Its nervous system fires before that kind of reasoning ever kicks in. The response is older than thought. It lives in the part of the brain that keeps animals alive, and that is just the pressure wave. The size alone changes the water around the whale in ways a shark can feel from more than a mile away. What the whale does with sound reaches even further. The blue whale does not rush. It does not need to. At full cruise, it moves at about 5 miles per hour, slower than you would jog. But the sheer volume of its body moving through water at that speed creates something that scientists call a bow wave, the same kind of pressure surge a ship's hull generates at sea. Stand on a dock when a large cargo ship passes. You feel the water change before you see the ship clearly. The wave comes first, then the force, then the wake that rocks everything tied to the dock for minutes afterward. A blue whale creates a version of that effect, scaled to something biological. Researchers studying hydrodynamics in large marine animals found that a blue whale's forward movement displaces a column of water roughly the width of a school gymnasium. That column gets pushed ahead of the whale, sideways and downward simultaneously. The animal is not touching anything around it. It is simply moving, and everything within a few hundred feet reacts. Fish scatter, krill clouds split apart. Smaller marine mammals change direction. The ocean reorganizes around the whale's path the way a crowd splits when something enormous walks through it. For a great white shark, this creates a specific kind of problem. Great whites are ambush predators. They rely on stillness, patience, and the element of surprise. They pick a spot, usually near a rocky edge or a seal colony, and they wait. Then they explode upward or sideways at speed, using momentum and surprise to hit prey before it can react. A blue whale destroys every part of that strategy the moment it enters the area. The pressure wave arrives first and disrupts the shark's ability to hold a still, focused position. The water turbulence scrambles the shark's ability to sense the subtle movements of prey. Everything the shark was reading, the tiny pressure changes from a seal's flipper, the faint electrical signal of a fish's heartbeat, gets buried in noise. Scientists who tagged great whites off the California coast noted that sharks abandoned hunting zones even before direct overlap with a whale. The whale was still a significant distance away. The sharks had detected the pressure signature long before the whale arrived at their location. One researcher described it like trying to have a precise conversation at a concert. The signal is still there. The shark can still sense prey. But the background noise from the whale's movement is so overwhelming that the precision the shark depends on gets completely washed out. There is a second layer to this. Blue whales are not random wanderers. They follow dense krill patches, often surfacing and diving in repetitive patterns within a defined zone. A whale feeding in an area will stay in that area for hours. It will dive, surface, feed, and dive again. The disruption continues as long as the whale is present. For a great white working a seal colony nearby, that means the hunting window simply closes. The shark is not fleeing a direct threat. It is leaving because the conditions for a successful hunt no longer exist. And the movement is only one piece of this. Because beneath the surface, the whale is also producing something else entirely. Something the shark detects through a completely different system. Something that travels through the ocean at speeds that make the pressure wave look slow. Close your eyes and imagine a sound so low you cannot hear it. You cannot hear it, but you feel it in your chest, in your teeth, in the space behind your eyes. That is what a blue whale's call does to the water around it. Blue whales produce the loudest sounds of any animal on Earth. Their calls register at around 180 decibels underwater. To put that in terms you can feel, a jet engine at takeoff runs around 140 decibels. A blue whale is louder than that. The sound travels through the ocean at roughly 1 mile per second, far faster than sound moves through air, and it carries without fading across hundreds of miles of open water. Scientists confirmed this decades ago when they began using underwater microphones originally built to detect submarines. Those sensors, stretched across ocean basins, started picking up calls from blue whales thousands of miles away. A single whale singing off the coast of California had its voice recorded by equipment positioned near Hawaii. The calls fall into a range called infrasound, frequencies so low they sit below the threshold of human hearing. Humans hear sounds down to about 20 cycles per second. Blue whale calls drop as low as 10 cycles per second. You would walk through the ocean next to one and hear almost nothing, but you would feel the pressure moving through your body like a slow pulse. Great white sharks cannot hear in the way humans do. They have inner ears, but those structures are tuned to a different range. What the shark does have is the lateral line system running the length of its body, a network of tiny fluid-filled channels packed with hair cells that bend when water pressure changes. Those hair cells fire electrical signals directly to the brain. When a blue whale calls at full volume nearby, the pressure wave from that sound moves through the water like a slow, massive pulse. The shark's lateral line does not process it as a sound. It processes it as a physical force. Every hair cell in that lateral line fires at once. Scientists studying shark behavior after controlled acoustic experiments found that low-frequency pressure pulses in the infrasound range triggered strong avoidance responses. The sharks did not approach the source. They turned and moved away. The stronger the signal, the faster the departure. Now consider what it means to be a great white shark sitting in the water when a blue whale 20 miles away begins to call. The sound arrives before any other signal, before the pressure wave of movement, before any chemical trace in the water. The first thing the shark knows is that something enormous just announced itself from across the open ocean. And that announcement does not stop. Blue whales call repeatedly during feeding migrations. The pulses come in patterns, sometimes every few minutes, sometimes in long rolling sequences that last for hours. The signal keeps arriving. It keeps flooding the shark's lateral line. There is nowhere in the nearby water where that pressure does not reach. What scientists found next about the shark's specific sensory response to this made the picture even more extreme. because the lateral line is only one of the systems getting hit. A great white shark does not rely on a single sense. It runs 5 at once, all of them feeding information to its brain simultaneously. Vision, smell, hearing, pressure detection through the lateral line, and a 6th sense so precise it can detect the electrical field produced by a beating heart buried under sand. That last one is called electroreception. The shark's snout is covered in thousands of tiny gel-filled pores called ampullae of Lorenzini. Each pore connects to a short canal lined with cells that respond to electrical fields in the water. Living animals generate electrical fields just by moving their muscles and pumping blood. A great white can detect those fields from several feet away, which sounds modest until you realize it can use this sense to find prey hidden under the ocean floor, completely invisible, completely still, giving off nothing but the faint electrical hum of a heartbeat. This system is extraordinarily sensitive. Scientists describe it as tuned to detect signals as faint as 1/1000th of a volt. To put that into perspective, that is roughly the same as detecting a single battery powering a small flashlight from half a mile away. Now introduce a blue whale. A blue whale's muscles generate electrical fields at a completely different scale. Its heart beats about 8 times per minute, each beat pumping roughly 58 gallons of blood through a system of arteries thicker than a drain pipe. The electrical output from that organ alone is enormous. Then add the muscle activity of an animal 100 feet long swimming through the water, contracting millions of muscle fibers with every stroke of its tail. The electrical environment around a blue whale is saturated. It radiates outward through the water in all directions. For a great white's electroreception system, which evolved to pick up the faintest possible signal from the smallest possible source, suddenly receiving a signal this overwhelming is the sensory equivalent of trying to read a text message while someone shines a stadium floodlight directly in your eyes. The system designed for precision gets blasted with noise. Scientists studying how sharks respond to large-scale electrical interference found that the ampullae of Lorenzini essentially lose resolution in the presence of massive bioelectric fields. The shark can no longer distinguish the precise location or size of a separate target. The electrical landscape around it becomes impossible to read clearly, and here is the part that matters for understanding the avoidance behavior. The shark does not just lose one sense near a blue whale, it loses resolution across multiple systems simultaneously. The pressure detection from the lateral line gets flooded by the whale's movement and calls. The electroreception gets saturated by the whale's bioelectric field. The shark's ability to hunt with precision effectively shuts down in the whale's vicinity. For an animal that depends on sensory precision to survive, this is a full system failure. Every tool it uses to locate, track and catch prey stops working at the level of accuracy the shark needs. What the shark does next is the same thing any intelligent predator does when its tools stop working. It leaves, fast. But there is one more layer to this that researchers did not expect to find. Something in the water itself, invisible and chemical, that the shark can taste from miles away. The data came in slowly at first, a dot on a map, then another, then a pattern so consistent across different sharks, different years, and different researchers that it became impossible to explain away. Scientists at the Pacific Shark Research Center began compiling satellite tag data from great whites around the Farallon Islands in the early 2000s. The tags transmitted the shark's depth and location at regular intervals, building a picture of exactly where each animal went and when. Researchers expected to see the shark stay close to the islands through the fall feeding season, stacking up near the seal colonies, making regular feeding runs. Instead, the maps showed something else. When blue whale presence in the area spiked, marked by separate acoustic monitoring equipment that recorded whale calls, the shark location data showed rapid departures. Sharks that had spent weeks circling within a few miles of the island suddenly appeared on the map 100, 150, even 200 miles away. One tagged shark, a large male researchers had been tracking for 3 seasons, covered more than 120 miles in under 48 hours after a blue whale entered its core territory. That is a sprint by shark standards. Great whites are capable of bursting to 25 miles per hour in short runs, but they cruise at much lower speeds to conserve energy. Covering that distance that fast meant the animal was pushing hard and staying out of its normal slow patrol rhythm. The retreats shared a consistent pattern. The sharks did not circle and investigate. They did not linger at the edge of the whale's range. They turned and went deep, dropping below the surface layer where the water is warmer and where most of the whale's acoustic and pressure signals are strongest. Then they moved fast in a direction that put distance between themselves and the whale. When the whale moved on, the sharks returned. The lag time between a whale's departure and the return of sharks to their prior territory averaged about 2 to 3 days. Researchers interpreted this as the sharks waiting for environmental signals to confirm the whale was gone before re-entering the zone. That detail matters. The sharks were not just reacting in the moment. They were staying away after the threat cleared. That suggests the response involves more than a simple reflexive startle. The shark was tracking a situation, not just a stimulus. A separate study used acoustic monitoring buoys alongside the satellite tags. When researchers overlaid the whale call recordings with the shark movement data, the correlation was tight. Shark departures began within hours of detectable whale calls reaching the monitoring area, often before whale sightings were confirmed visually. The sound arrived first. The sharks responded to the sound. One researcher noted during a conference presentation that the speed of the response suggested the sharks were not waiting for multiple signals to confirm the threat. A single sufficiently strong signal, the whale's acoustic signature arriving through the water, was enough to trigger the full retreat. This is a predator with no natural enemies, one that has survived 5 mass extinctions, abandoning proven productive hunting territory because of a sound. That tells you something about the magnitude of what the blue whale represents in the shark's sensory world, and what happens when you watch the moment of encounter directly, from a camera mounted on a drone above the water, is even more unsettling than the data alone. Great white sharks do not chase prey across open water. That is a common image, the shark powering through the surface, cutting toward a target. It happens, but it is a last step, the end of a long, patient setup. The real hunt looks completely different. A great white picks a location. Rocky ledges near seal colonies are favourites, underwater ridges that funnel swimming animals through a narrow corridor. Shallow shelves where the water is clear from below but dark from above. The shark finds the geometry that works and it waits. Then it watches. It cruises in slow, wide circles below the zone of good visibility, where it blends into the dark water beneath a seal or sea lion swimming near the surface. The target above cannot see down into the darkness clearly enough to spot the shark. The shark below can see the target's silhouette against the lighter surface. The shark waits for the right angle, the right moment, and then it accelerates straight upward at full speed. This attack, called a vertical breach, can launch a great white partially out of the water. The speed at impact is somewhere around 30 miles per hour. The element of surprise is total. The seal has almost no warning and even less time to react. That entire strategy collapses in the presence of a blue whale for one specific reason. A great white's hunting method depends on stillness and precision in the water around it. The shark needs to be able to read tiny pressure changes to track its prey's movement. It needs clear, undisturbed water to maintain its position below its target without being detected. It needs the background noise of the ocean to be quiet enough that the faint signals from a seal's swimming motion stand out clearly. A blue whale wipes out every single one of those conditions. The pressure displacement from the whale's movement turns the water around it into constant turbulence. The infrasound pulses from the whale's calls hammer the shark's pressure detection system at intervals. The bioelectric field from the whale's enormous body saturates the electrical landscape. The shark cannot hold a still, stealthy position because the water itself is not still. It cannot read the tiny signals from prey because the whale's signals drown them out at every frequency the shark uses. Imagine trying to find a single candle flame in a room while someone is aiming a spotlight directly at your face. The candle is still there, you're not blind. But the precision you need to locate something faint disappears completely when something overwhelming is flooding your senses. A researcher who spent years studying great white predation off South Africa described the effect this way. When a blue whale is in the area, the shark's entire hunting toolkit becomes unreliable. The shark is not scared of being eaten. It is functionally blind to everything it was trying to hunt. Abandoning the territory makes complete sense from a survival standpoint. Staying means burning energy on a hunt that cannot succeed, while also processing overwhelming sensory input. Leaving costs the shark a good territory temporarily. Staying costs it more. And there is one specific window when the relationship between these two animals gets even more complicated. A moment when the roles shift slightly and the rules get harder to read. The ocean is not empty between animals. It is full of information. Chemical signals drift on currents, spread through water columns, and travel for miles before fading. Marine animals read this chemical landscape constantly. For many species, smell is the first sense that fires, arriving before sight, before sound, before anything physical. Great white sharks are built for chemical detection on an extreme scale. The portion of a great white's brain dedicated to processing smell takes up roughly 2/3 of its total brain volume. Its nostrils, positioned on the underside of its snout, work like a 2-channel antenna. Each nostril detects slightly different concentrations of the same scent molecule, and the brain calculates direction from that difference the same way stereo speakers create a sense of space and sound. A great white can detect 1 drop of blood diluted across the volume of water in an average backyard swimming pool, and it can track that trace across open water for more than a mile, swimming directly toward the source by following the gradient of increasing concentration. Now consider what surrounds a blue whale. Blue whales, like all large marine mammals, shed skin cells constantly. They release metabolic waste products into the water. During feeding, krill fragments scatter through the water column around them, and occasionally from minor abrasions or simply from the physical contact of the ocean environment, trace amounts of blood enter the water around a large whale. Blue whale blood carries specific chemical compounds, proteins and fatty acid signatures that are unique to a very large marine mammal. Scientists analysing these compounds found that they do not match the chemical profile of typical prey species for great whites. The signature is fundamentally different from seal blood, sea lion blood, or fish. It signals something in a completely different size and category. Researchers who studied shark behaviour in response to chemical cues from large cetaceans found that sharks showed avoidance responses to the water, sampled from areas where blue whales had recently been swimming. The sharks detected the chemical trace, interpreted it as belonging to something outside their prey category, and moved away from the concentration gradient rather than toward it. This is the opposite of what sharks do with prey scent. With prey, the shark accelerates toward increasing concentration. With the blue whale chemical signature, the shark's behaviour flips. It moves away from higher concentrations. The smell repels rather than attracts. The exact mechanism behind this flip is still being studied. One line of thinking is that the sheer scale of the chemical signal, far larger than any prey animal the shark has ever encountered, triggers a threat response rather than a hunting response in the shark's brain. Another angle focuses on specific compounds in large cetacean biochemistry that may carry information about body size or metabolic power that sharks have evolved to read as a warning. Either way, the chemical landscape around a blue whale extends the effective radius of the whale's influence far beyond what its size, sound, or pressure wave alone would reach. A great white downwind of a blue whale's path through the water detects the trace long before any other signal arrives. The ocean around a blue whale is, chemically speaking, already announcing its presence in every direction. And what that announcement triggers in a predator that has survived unchanged for millions of years is something that the next piece of evidence makes even harder to ignore. Picture a wall of muscle roughly 15 feet wide, solid, dense, and capable of generating enough force to launch a 100-foot animal upward out of the water. That is a blue whale's tail fluke, and it is worth spending a moment on what it actually represents in physical terms. A blue whale's tail generates an estimated force of around 700 horsepower at full power. For comparison, a mid-size car produces somewhere around 150 to 200 horsepower. The whale's tail, on a single downstroke, produces roughly 4 times the output of a car engine, directed entirely through the water. The tail does not work like a fishtail waving side to side. It moves up and down in a full vertical arc, with the upper stroke doing most of the work. Each sweep of those flukes displaces a massive volume of water and shoots the whale forward. And during that movement, the trailing wake from the flukes creates turbulence that extends dozens of feet behind the animal, churning the water into a confused, unstable zone. What would that tail do to a great white shark? Researchers have never documented a blue whale deliberately striking a shark. The blue whale's anatomy and behaviour are oriented around filter feeding, not defence or combat. But accidental contact between large marine animals does occur, and the physics of what a tail strike from a blue whale would mean for a great white are straightforward. A great white shark weighs at most around 5,000 pounds. A single full-force strike from a blue whale's tail, delivering force equivalent to several car engines simultaneously, would be catastrophically damaging to an animal that size. The skeletal and muscular structure of a shark is built for speed and flexibility, not absorbing blunt force. The impact would be comparable to being struck by a large vehicle at highway speed. The shark does not need to experience this to respond to the risk. Its nervous system is wired to assess threats based on the signals it detects, and the signals a blue whale broadcasts, in pressure, sound, electrical field, and chemical trace. All converge to paint a picture of something the shark cannot afford to test. There is a principle in animal behaviour research called risk sensitivity. Predators do not always pursue the highest available reward. When the potential cost of failure is severe enough, they shift toward avoiding loss over chasing gain. A great white that abandons a seal colony because a blue whale is nearby is not making a mistake. It is making the calculation that makes sense when one bad outcome means the end of the hunt permanently. Researchers studying predator behaviour in multiple ecosystems have found that apex predators regularly retreat from animals significantly larger than themselves, even animals that pose no direct predatory threat. The size difference alone carries information, and when that size difference is accompanied by the full sensory impact of a blue whale, the calculation becomes overwhelming in one direction. But what would happen if a blue whale actually chose to engage? Scientists have now recorded something that changes the picture in an unexpected direction. Blue whales do not hunt. They have no teeth, no claws, no aggressive anatomy. Their entire body design is built around one function: scooping up enormous quantities of tiny krill and filtering the water out through massive baleen plates hanging from their upper jaw. They are the largest filter feeders that have ever existed. Combat is not part of their biology, and yet, on multiple recorded occasions, blue whales have turned toward great white sharks. The first accounts came from whale watch vessels and research boats observing blue whales off the California coast. Observers noticed that when a blue whale surfaced near a tagged or observed great white, the whale did not simply ignore the shark and continue on its course. In several cases, the whale changed direction. It moved toward the shark's last known position. This was surprising enough that researchers debated what they were actually seeing. Was the whale simply redirecting for a different reason, following a new krill patch, responding to something else entirely? The observations were hard to interpret without more data. Then drone footage and underwater camera deployments began producing clearer images of these interactions. In footage captured off the California and Baja California coastlines, researchers observed blue whales performing what appeared to be deliberate maneuvers near sharks. The whale would shift its body angle, orient its rostrum, the flat, broad snout at the front of its head, toward the shark's position and begin moving forward. The sharks departed immediately, every time. No hesitation, no circling, no second assessment. The moment the whale reoriented toward the shark left. Scientists offered several interpretations. One is that the whale was not targeting the shark at all, but was simply following krill that happened to be near the shark's location. The shark's departure would then be a consequence of the whale's approach, rather than the whale actively driving the shark away. A second interpretation is that the blue whale was responding to a potential disturbance near it. Blue whale calves swim close to their mothers, and any large animal near a mother with a calf could trigger a protective response. In the footage reviewed by researchers, several of the encounters involved a mother-calf pair, which supports this reading. A third and more provocative interpretation from some marine biologists is that blue whales may have learned over long timescales to move towards sharks as a way of removing irritants from their space. Whether this constitutes intentional behaviour or something less deliberate remains an open question. What is not debated is the outcome. When a blue whale of 100 feet and 300,000 pounds begins moving toward a great white shark, the shark leaves. The whale does not need to make contact. The approach itself is enough. And the behaviour that follows from the sharks in these situations reveals something about how they process this kind of threat over time. Because these sharks do not just leave once, they remember. Blue whales are not the only animals that send great white sharks fleeing, and understanding the second animal on that list makes the whole pattern sharper. Orcas are not the largest animals in the ocean. A large male orca reaches about 23 feet long, roughly the same size as a big great white shark. The two animals are evenly matched in size, and yet documented evidence consistently shows that great whites abandon territory when orcas arrive, using the same rapid departure pattern observed near blue whales. The difference between the blue whale situation and the orca situation is important. Blue whales pose no direct predatory threat to great whites. The shark's avoidance there is driven by sensory overwhelming and size calculus. Orcas are a completely different story. Orcas hunt great white sharks. This was considered unlikely, or at least very rare, until a series of documented events off the South African coast in the late 2000s began shifting the picture. Researchers found the carcasses of great white sharks washed ashore near Cape Town, with their livers surgically removed with extraordinary precision. No thrashing, no torn flesh, clean extraction. The only predator considered capable of that level of coordinated targeted dismemberment is an orca working within a pod. Orcas are not solo hunters. They coordinate, they communicate. A pod of orcas hunting a great white shark will organise into roles, some driving the shark toward the surface, some flanking, one delivering the final strike. The great white, a formidable individual predator, does not function well against a coordinated group attack from animals its own size. The evidence of this became more specific in 2017, when two orcas off South Africa were directly linked to the deaths of 5 great white sharks over a short period. The same two individuals, identified by their distinctive fin shapes, were observed in proximity to multiple shark carcasses. Researchers named them and tracked their movements across subsequent seasons. After those incidents, something striking appeared in the data. Tagged great white sharks in the region began abandoning the area after confirmed orca presence and staying away for extended periods, up to several months in some cases. The departure times extended far beyond what was needed to simply avoid a brief encounter. This parallels what researchers found near blue whales. The sharks were not just reacting in the moment, they were changing their territorial behaviour based on remembered association with a specific stretch of water. The pattern across both cases, the enormous blue whale and the organised orca predator, suggests something fundamental about how great white sharks manage risk. When a signal arrives that the cost of staying outweighs the benefit, the shark leaves and stays gone long enough for the threat to fully clear. What that says about shark cognition and about the level of processing behind what looks like pure instinct is a question researchers are only beginning to take seriously, and the direction those sharks flee, specifically downward, tells its own story. When a great white shark leaves an area in response to a blue whale, it does not just swim sideways, it goes down. This detail showed up consistently in the satellite tag data from the Farallon Island studies. Sharks responding to blue whale presence dropped in depth rapidly before changing horizontal direction. Some dived 300 feet or more before beginning their lateral retreat. The dive came first. That is not obvious behaviour. If you want to put distance between yourself and something at the surface, the fastest route is horizontal. Going down first cost energy and time, so why do the sharks do it? The answer is in the physics of how blue whale signals travel through water. Sound and pressure waves from a large animal propagate most strongly through the upper layers of the ocean, roughly the top 600 feet, where the water is warmer and less dense. This zone is called the epipelagic layer, the sunlit surface region where most of the ocean's primary activity happens. Within that upper layer, the blue whale's acoustic signals travel efficiently in all directions. The water carries them cleanly, without the distortion and absorption that happens at greater depth. A shark swimming within that layer is bathed in the whale's sound continuously. Below 600 feet, the water gets colder and denser. Sound behaves differently in this zone. Some frequencies get trapped in a natural sound channel that actually helps them travel further horizontally, but the surface signals from the whale above begin to lose intensity as the shark descends. The deeper the shark goes, the more the acoustic pressure eases. Researchers noted that the depth profile of the shark's dives during whale avoidance events matched almost exactly the depth at which the whale's acoustic signal would be expected to drop below the threshold that triggers the lateral line response. The sharks were diving just far enough to reduce the sensory overwhelm before relocating. It is a remarkably efficient response. Rather than enduring the full signal while trying to swim away horizontally at the surface, the shark drops below the worst of it, moves at depth where the noise is reduced, then reevaluates its position from there. There is a second reason the deep water is preferable. Great whites can regulate their body temperature to some extent, and cooler, deeper water can allow them to sustain higher muscle performance over a longer swim. Dropping into cooler water during a high-energy retreat may help the shark maintain speed over the distance it needs to cover. One researcher made an observation that stayed with the team. The sharks were not fleeing blindly. The dive first, then lateral movement, then re-emergence and direction check. That sequence suggests the animals were making a series of functional decisions rather than simply panicking and swimming until the stimulus faded. That level of behavioural sophistication does not fit the image most people carry of a great white as a pure instinct machine operating on a simple sense and respond loop. Something more considered is happening, and the deeper you look at what great whites do over longer timescales, the clearer it becomes that these animals carry something researchers have only recently started to acknowledge as memory. Every rule in biology has a window. The overwhelming size advantage a blue whale holds over a great white closes to something almost manageable during one specific period, the first weeks of a calf's life. A newborn blue whale is, in purely relative terms, the closest thing to vulnerable that a blue whale will ever be. The word vulnerable is doing a lot of work in that sentence. A newborn blue whale weighs around 5,000 pounds and stretches roughly 23 feet long. That is approximately the same weight as a large great white shark and roughly the same length. For a brief window at the very start of its life, a blue whale calf is within the size range of animals that great whites have historically engaged with. Researchers observing blue whale calves in breeding and calving areas off the Baja California coast documented something unusual. Tagged great white sharks occasionally lingered in waters adjacent to known calving zones. The behaviour was different from the rapid departures seen near adult blue whales. The sharks held position, circling at distances, without the clean exit response that adult whale presence triggers. This suggests that at some perceptual level, the calf's signature, smaller size, weaker pressure displacement, lower acoustic output, and proportionally smaller bioelectric field does not trigger the same overwhelming avoidance response in the shark that an adult does. Whether great whites have ever successfully attacked a blue whale calf is a question with very little confirmed data behind it. A few historical accounts from whalers described what might have been shark bites on blue whale calves, but those records are unreliable and impossible to verify against modern standards. What researchers have documented is that great white sharks in the vicinity of calving blue whales do not follow through on any investigation, and the reason appears to be immediately present in the water with the calf at all times: the mother. An adult female blue whale who has just given birth is not in a calm state. She is protective, attentive, and physically positioned close to her calf continuously. The calf swims directly alongside her, sometimes tucked against her body. The mother's full adult signature, 100 feet of mass, full acoustic output, full pressure displacement, full bioelectric field, radiates outward in every direction around both animals. Even a curious shark circling at a distance from the calf is, by simple geometry, also circling within the detection range of the mother. The same signals that drive full adult avoidance reach the shark from the mother's body, even as the calf itself might not fully trigger the response alone. The window exists in theory. In practice, it is sealed shut by the presence of an adult female whose sensory output alone does the work that physical proximity would otherwise require, and the calf will not stay in that window for long. What happens to a blue whale calf in the weeks after birth accelerates faster than almost any other growth story in nature. A blue whale calf is born large, 23 feet long, 5,000 pounds, but it is not born ready. It cannot yet match the pressure output of an adult, cannot generate the full acoustic signature, and does not carry the full chemical profile of a mature blue whale. In those first weeks, it exists in a smaller category. Then it starts drinking. A blue whale mother produces milk so rich in fat it has roughly the consistency of toothpaste. The calf nurses by pressing against the mother's underside, and the milk is actively injected into the calf's mouth rather than suckled, a necessary adaptation for nursing underwater without swallowing seawater. The calf consumes roughly 100 gallons of this milk per day, 100 gallons, every day. The result is a growth rate that has almost no comparison in the animal kingdom. A blue whale calf gains roughly 200 pounds per day during peak nursing. That is not a typo. 200 pounds per day. By the time the calf is around 7 months old and beginning the weaning process, it has grown from 5,000 pounds to approximately 35,000 pounds. It has also stretched from 23 feet to roughly 50 feet long in 7 months. To put that growth arc in terms that make it feel real, in the time between summer break and winter break of a school year, this animal adds the weight of 4 adult male African elephants and gains the length of a full city bus. What this means for the vulnerability window discussed in the previous chapter is simple. That window closes fast. The calf's acoustic output increases as its body grows, its pressure displacement expands with each week of development, its bioelectric field scales with its increasing mass and metabolic activity. The sensory signature that a great white detects from this animal grows progressively more overwhelming with each passing week. By the time the calf is a few months old, researchers believe its signature alone is likely sufficient to trigger avoidance responses in nearby sharks, separate from the mother's influence. Marine biologists studying blue whale calf development noted that the growth rate is almost certainly connected to predation pressure at the calf's most vulnerable stage. Growing through the danger window as fast as biology allows is a survival strategy written into the species at the deepest level. The same pressure that makes orcas a more significant threat to blue whale calves than great whites is also behind this growth strategy. Orcas are the documented primary predator of blue whale calves. Researchers have observed coordinated orca attacks on calves, and the speed at which calves grow past a manageable target size appears to be the whale's primary defense against this threat. The growth itself is a weapon, and the pace of it means the vulnerability window that great whites might theoretically exploit is, in almost every real-world case, already closing before any shark gets close enough to act on it. But what the calf grows into carries its own specific power, a power that operates not through size alone, but through sound. Sound at high enough volume does not just carry information, it does physical things to the body. Humans experience a version of this near a subwoofer cranked to full volume at a concert. The bass frequencies push against your chest, your vision blurs slightly, your balance shifts. You feel the sound before your brain has time to interpret it as music. That response happens because low-frequency sound waves carry enough physical energy to interact directly with body tissue and fluid. Blue whale calls operate in that range of physical interaction, but at a scale that dwarfs anything a concert speaker produces. At 180 decibels, the pressure wave of a blue whale's call moving through water carries enough energy to physically vibrate the fluid-filled structures inside nearby animals' bodies. Researchers studying the effects of high-intensity, low-frequency sound on marine life found that fish exposed to sounds in the infrasound range showed disorientation, loss of schooling formation, and in some cases physical damage to inner ear structures after prolonged exposure. The mechanism is relatively direct. Fish and many marine animals have structures called otoliths, small dense bodies suspended in fluid inside the skull. These structures move when the animal moves, and the movement tells the brain about acceleration and orientation. When a powerful enough low-frequency sound wave passes through the water, it vibrates the fluid surrounding the otoliths and triggers false orientation signals in the brain. The animal suddenly does not know which way is up. For krill, the primary prey of blue whales, this effect appears to work as a feeding tool. Some researchers have proposed that a blue whale's call, at close range, can disorient krill clouds enough to make them easier to engulf during a feeding lunge. The whale's call arrives ahead of its open mouth, already scrambling the prey. For a great white shark in the vicinity during an active blue whale feeding sequence, the acoustic environment reaches its most intense. The whale calls repeatedly, often in rhythmic bursts timed with feeding approaches. The pressure in the water escalates. The shark's lateral line is flooded at irregular intervals with the physical pressure wave of each call. At close enough range, researchers believe this could produce genuine disorientation in the shark, similar to what has been documented in fish. The shark's vestibular sense, its ability to track its own orientation in the water, could be disrupted by the pressure waves hitting its fluid-filled inner structures. This is a remarkable thing to sit with. The world's most precisely tuned ocean predator, a machine built over millions of years for sensory perfection, can be rendered functionally confused by the sound of an animal that is not even targeting it. The blue whale is not trying to disorient the shark, it is feeding. The shark just happens to be inside the radius of an acoustic event powerful enough to disrupt anything smaller than the whale itself. And what that does to the specific sensory system that makes great whites the most dangerous predators in the ocean is something researchers only began to fully appreciate recently. The ampullae of Lorenzini, the gel-filled pores covering a great white's snout, are so sensitive that they can detect the electrical field of a flounder buried completely under sand. The shark cannot see it, cannot smell it from that close distance, cannot hear its heartbeat. But the faint electrical pulse from the fish's muscle activity bleeds through the sand and into the water, and the shark finds it anyway. This system is one of the most refined sensory tools in the animal kingdom. Scientists describe the sensitivity using numbers that require a moment to absorb. The ampullae can detect voltage differences as small as 5 billionths of a volt across the length of the shark's snout. That is the kind of precision that engineers building scientific instruments spend years trying to achieve in laboratory conditions. Now consider what happens when that instrument gets placed near a blue whale. Every muscle in a living body generates electrical activity when it contracts. A blue whale contracting the muscles of its tail on a single downstroke involves millions of individual muscle fibers firing in sequence across a structure 15 feet wide. The electrical output from that single movement dwarfs the signal of any prey animal the shark's electroreception evolved to detect. Add the blue whale's heart, which beats around 8 times per minute and pumps roughly 58 gallons per beat through vessels the width of a human torso. The electrical event of each heartbeat in an organ that size is not a faint whisper in the water, it is a wave. Researchers studying bioelectric fields in large marine mammals measured the electrical output of cetaceans and found that the field strength drops with distance, according to standard physics, but the starting intensity is so high that even at significant distances, the residual field around a large blue whale remains detectable by instruments sensitive enough to read it. A great white shark within a few hundred feet of a blue whale is sitting inside an electrical environment that its ampullae cannot process the way they were designed to function. The system tries to read millions of separate signals at once. The brain behind it receives a wall of input that carries no useful directional information about prey. Every signal from every direction is large, loud, and featureless. The shark is electrically blind. Scientists studying electroreception saturation in elasmobranch species, the group that includes sharks and rays, found that when the background electrical noise in the water exceeds a certain threshold, the resolution of the ampullae drops sharply. The system still functions, it still detects that large electrical fields are present, but its ability to locate specific small sources with the precision needed for hunting collapses. For an animal that uses this sense as a final targeting system right before a strike, losing that resolution means losing the most reliable tool at the moment it matters most. The shark's senses are not being switched off by the whale, they are being overwhelmed by it, and that distinction matters because it means the shark's nervous system is still firing at full intensity. It is receiving more input than normal, not less. And a nervous system flooded with overwhelming, unresolvable input does not stay calm. What it does next is something scientists are beginning to recognize as a direct link to the ancient wiring behind predator survival. Great white sharks have been in the ocean for roughly 16 million years. Blue whales, in their modern form, have existed for around 3 to 5 million years. For at least that overlap period, these two animals have shared the same water. That is a long time for a pattern to get written into the genetics and nervous systems of both species. Evolution does not build behaviors from scratch in response to individual experiences. It amplifies the behaviors that help animals survive long enough to reproduce, and it does so over enormous stretches of time. If avoiding blue whales improved a great white survival rate even slightly, across millions of years, the individuals whose nervous systems responded strongly to blue whale signals would have left more offspring than those that didn't. The behavior would intensify across generations without any individual shark needing to learn it consciously. This is likely why the avoidance response in great whites appears so immediate and consistent. Researchers observed it in sharks tagged near California, off South Africa, and in the waters around Australia. Different populations, different ocean conditions, no shared social learning between them. The pattern shows up the same way across all of them. Marine paleontologists studying the fossil record of both animals found evidence suggesting that the ancestors of modern great whites, including the megalodon lineage and the ancient mackerel sharks that preceded the modern species, coexisted with the ancestors of baleen whales for tens of millions of years. The relationship between very large filter feeders and large predatory sharks is ancient enough that it likely shaped the evolution of both animals in ways that are still active today. One angle that researchers have explored is whether blue whales evolved their extreme size partly in response to predation pressure from large prehistoric sharks. A body large enough to render even a megalodon a manageable risk would confer obvious survival advantages during the period when those predators were present. The blue whale's size, by this logic, is partly a historical response to a threat that no longer exists in its original form. The modern great white, meanwhile, may carry an avoidance response calibrated to something far larger than itself, that no longer poses any hunting threat. The behaviour persists because it was never costly enough to fade. A shark that avoids a blue whale loses a hunting territory temporarily. A shark whose ancestors did not avoid the massive prehistoric predators that shared the ocean with them may not have survived to pass on its genes. 16 million years of shared ocean time means the behavioural pattern between these two animals was not shaped by a few observed encounters. It was shaped by millions of encounters across thousands of generations, each one selecting slightly more strongly for the version of the shark that responded to blue whale signals by leaving immediately. What modern scientists now have the tools to do is watch that ancient programming activate in real time, documented by satellite tags and acoustic sensors in a way that previous generations of researchers could only theorize about. And what the data reveals when you watch an entire ocean basin worth of these encounters together is a picture that reframes how we understand predator territory entirely. For most of ocean science history, researchers studied one animal at a time. You tagged a shark and followed the shark. You deployed hydrophones and listened for whales. The two data streams existed in separate studies, written up in separate papers, read by researchers who mostly stayed in their own lane. Then a team working out of Stanford University's Hopkins Marine Station began doing something different. They started overlaying the data. The idea was straightforward. They had years of satellite tag data from great whites around the California coast. They had years of acoustic monitoring data from underwater microphones that tracked blue whale calls across the same region. Both datasets covered the same ocean, the same years, in some cases the same weeks. Nobody had put them on the same map at the same time. When they did, the pattern was immediate and striking. The maps showed shark location points as dots, scattered across the ocean around the Farallon Islands and along the California coastline. The whale acoustic data came in as regions, zones where call frequency was high enough to indicate sustained blue whale presence. When researchers animated these maps across time, a clear relationship emerged. Shark dots clustered in the zones where whale acoustic activity was absent. When the whale regions expanded or shifted, the shark clusters moved. Opposite directions, roughly corresponding timelines. The sharks and the whales were moving like charged magnets on the same map, maintaining separation across hundreds of miles of open ocean. Some of the individual shark tracks showed particularly clean responses. One female shark had spent 3 weeks working a tight zone between the Farallon Islands and the coast. Her tag data showed a regular pattern: dives to a certain depth, surface intervals, slow movement between two known hunting locations. Then, over the course of about 18 hours, her entire position shifted 140 miles to the southeast. The acoustic data for the same period showed blue whale calls entering her prior territory from the north. Researchers could read the map like a story. Whale call arrives in the north, shark leaves south. Whale call intensity increases in the old shark territory over the following days. Shark stays gone. Whale call intensity drops after the whale passes through. Shark returns, but takes several days to move back to her original zone. The maps also revealed something the individual tag data alone had obscured. The avoidance behaviour was not random. The sharks were not fleeing in all directions indiscriminately. They were relocating to specific alternative zones, areas without whale acoustic signal, that also had characteristics consistent with viable hunting territory: rocky structure, shallower water, proximity to pinniped haul-out sites. The sharks were not just panicking, they were selecting. A shark that abandons a good territory and relocates to another viable territory is performing a cost-benefit calculation with real geographic knowledge behind it. It knows, based on prior experience or learned spatial memory, where an alternative hunting ground exists, and it goes there specifically rather than swimming blindly until the signal fades. This discovery pushed researchers toward a question they had not expected to be asking about great white sharks, and the answer that began coming back from the data over the following years changed what marine biologists thought they knew about shark intelligence. 27 miles west of San Francisco, a cluster of jagged rocks juts out of the cold Pacific. No trees, no beach, just granite and wind and the constant noise of tens of thousands of seabirds crowding every flat surface available. The Farallon Islands look inhospitable from a distance. From underwater, they are one of the richest hunting grounds on the California coast. Every fall, elephant seals haul out on the rocks by the hundreds. Northern fur seals follow. The water around the islands turns into a hunting zone for great white sharks that arrive from across the northeastern Pacific, some travelling more than 1,000 miles to reach the seal season. Researchers have documented more than 300 individual great whites using the Farallon feeding zone over the years, identified by the unique notch patterns in their dorsal fins. This concentration of known, tagged, identified sharks in a predictable location made the Farallones the ideal natural laboratory for studying great white behaviour. Scientists from the Point Blue Conservation Science Group and later the California Academy of Sciences and Stanford began building one of the most detailed long-term shark behavioural data sets in the world. They also noticed early on that the fall feeding season occasionally went quiet in ways that did not match the seal availability. Seals were still on the rocks, weather was fine, but the sharks vanished. It took cross-referencing with blue whale survey data collected by other research groups to see what was happening. In years when blue whale migration brought large numbers of whales through the Gulf of the Farallones, the shark feeding season was disrupted more severely. In years with fewer whale sightings in that corridor, the sharks remained more consistently active through the fall. One research season became particularly clean data. Blue whale presence near the islands was high and sustained through October. Acoustic monitoring confirmed near-continuous calling activity in the area for several weeks. During that same window, the tagging teams could not locate most of their known sharks in their usual positions. Follow-up tag data showed the sharks had redistributed along the coast, with clusters appearing near Monterey Bay and north of Point Reyes. When the whale acoustic data showed a drop in call density near the Farallones in late October, the sharks came back. Within 10 days of the whales moving through, tag data showed returning sharks taking up positions near the island's seal colonies again. The Farallon data also gave researchers the clearest look at the timing of individual shark departures relative to whale call arrival. Because the acoustic buoys recorded calls continuously, and the shark tags reported at regular intervals, researchers could narrow down how quickly sharks responded to whale signal. In most cases, the lag between the first strong whale call detection on the buoys and the first evidence of shark movement in the tag data was less than 12 hours. Several sharks showed changes in their depth and movement pattern within hours of the first call. One marine biologist who spent multiple seasons on the islands described watching this play out from a research vessel. Water full of seals, conditions perfect for a hunt, no sharks. Then the hydrophone would pick up distant blue whale calls, and the biologist would watch the surface and know that underneath, something ancient was unfolding exactly as it had for millions of years. The islands gave science its clearest window into this behaviour, but the relationship extends far beyond one stretch of California coastline. Blue whales eat krill. Specifically, they eat Antarctic krill and several related species of small shrimp-like crustaceans that form dense clouds in cold, nutrient-rich water. Each individual krill is about the size of a paperclip. A blue whale needs around 4 tons of them per day. To collect 4 tons of paperclip-sized animals daily, a blue whale lunges forward with its mouth open at speed, taking in an enormous volume of water in a single gulp. The water rushes in. The whale closes its jaws, then pushes the water back out through hundreds of long plates of keratin hanging from the upper jaw called baleen. The krill, too large to pass through the baleen filter, get trapped and swallowed. The water exits. A single feeding lunge can take in enough water to fill a backyard swimming pool. The whale does this hundreds of times per day during peak feeding season. Great white sharks do not appear anywhere in this process. A great white is too large to swallow, too fast to engulf in a feeding lunge, and contains none of the nutritional profile that blue whales are built to extract from food. The shark is, from a blue whale's dietary perspective, completely irrelevant. This one-sidedness is what makes the relationship between the two animals so unusual and so striking. The avoidance behavior documented across multiple research programs over multiple decades flows entirely from the shark toward the whale. The whale goes about its life. The shark responds. The whale has no behavioral modification tied to shark presence. Its feeding patterns, migration routes, calling behavior, and movement speed show no detectable response to great white sharks in the vicinity. Researchers confirm this by analysing blue whale track data during periods when tagged sharks were known to be nearby. The whale's behaviour did not change. It fed when krill were present. It moved on its migration schedule. A great white shark within a mile of it registered as nothing the whale's behaviour indicated any awareness of. For the shark, the situation is entirely different. Its territory selection, feeding activity, depth behaviour, and movement patterns all shift measurably in response to blue whale presence. The whale does not notice the shark. The shark cannot ignore the whale. From an evolutionary standpoint, this asymmetry makes sense. A blue whale has almost no reason to develop behavioural responses to great whites. Great whites cannot threaten an adult blue whale. The whale gains nothing from tracking their location or altering its behaviour when they appear, so it never developed the neural machinery to do so. The great white, on the other hand, gains survival value from responding to the blue whale's presence, not because the whale hunts it, but because the blue whale's physical impact on the shark's sensory environment makes hunting impossible, and the proximity of something so overwhelmingly large carries risk from accidental physical contact alone. Two animals, sharing the same ocean for millions of years, one completely indifferent and the other intensely aware. That gap in awareness tells you exactly where the power sits in this relationship, and what the whale carries through the water around it, invisible to the eye but detectable to every chemical sensor in the ocean, extends that power even further than its body alone would suggest. When a blue whale swims, it does not simply move through water, it reorganizes it. The technical term for what happens ahead of a large moving object in a fluid is a bow pressure wave. Ships generate them. Submarines generate them. Anything large enough, moving fast enough through a medium dense enough, pushes the medium away from its front surface and creates a zone of compressed fluid ahead of it. A blue whale at cruising speed generates a bow pressure wave proportional to its mass. At 100 feet long and close to 300,000 pounds, the wave it creates extends roughly 30 to 40 feet ahead of the animal and spreads outward to the sides at an angle. Anything within that zone experiences a push, a genuine physical force moving through the water. For small fish and krill, this push is enough to move them sideways. Researchers studying blue whale feeding behaviour found that the pressure wave actually begins dispersing krill patches slightly ahead of the whale's open mouth during a feeding lunge, which the whale compensates for by accelerating rapidly at the last moment to close the gap before the krill scatter too far. For a great white shark, which is far larger and heavier than krill, the pressure wave does not physically move it the way it moves a krill patch, but the shark's lateral line detects the wave with full intensity. Every hair cell along the lateral line responds to the compression arriving through the water, firing signals to the brain that report a massive, fast-moving object approaching. Scientists who study how sharks interpret lateral line signals describe the response as proportional to the signal's intensity. A large fish nearby creates a small lateral line signal. A seal moving at the surface creates a moderate one. A blue whale's bow pressure wave, arriving from several hundred feet away, creates a signal the lateral line system has almost no precedent for in terms of magnitude. The lateral line evolved to detect prey, nearby currents, and the movements of other sharks. It is calibrated for the scale of animals in the great white's normal environment, things between 1 pound and 1,000 pounds, moving at speeds between 1 and 15 miles per hour. A blue whale delivering a pressure wave from an animal weighing 60 times the shark's own mass at 5 miles per hour in open water is so far outside that calibrated range that the system essentially clips, like a microphone held too close to a speaker. Beyond the bow wave, the whale's tail creates a trailing turbulence zone that extends for hundreds of feet behind the animal. This wake churns the water into unstable, swirling columns that persist for several minutes after the whale has passed through an area. A shark entering a zone where a blue whale passed even 15 or 20 minutes earlier is still swimming through measurable physical turbulence. The whale leaves a corridor of disrupted water through any area it moves through, and that corridor carries more than just physical turbulence. It carries a chemical record of the whale's passage that the shark's most powerful long-range sense can read from miles away. The great white shark's brain is small relative to its body, roughly the size and shape of a hot dog, but within that compact structure, the sections responsible for processing sensory input are large, efficient, and extremely fast. The olfactory bulb, the part that handles smell, is enormous relative to the rest of the brain. The regions handling lateral line input and electroreception are well developed and directly connected to the motor systems that control swimming direction and speed. This layout tells you something about how the shark processes information. Sensory input arrives, gets processed quickly in specialized regions, and triggers a motor response with minimal steps in between. The shark does not deliberate in the way a mammal with a large cortex might. It receives a signal and responds. Neuroscientists studying elasmobranch brain architecture found that the pathways from sensory input to motor output in sharks are among the fastest in the vertebrate world. A stimulus strong enough to trigger a response does so in milliseconds. The animal is moving before anything resembling conscious evaluation has taken place. This speed is an advantage in almost every hunting scenario. A seal changes direction, and the shark adjusts before the seal completes the turn. Prey releases a burst of electrical activity, and the shark snaps toward the source before the signal has fully arrived. The system is tuned for instant, accurate response to prey scale stimuli. The problem arises when the stimulus falls completely outside the range the system was calibrated for. The shark's threat assessment circuitry operates on a scale comparison. Signals from animals smaller than the shark trigger hunting behavior. Signals from animals roughly the same size can trigger either hunting or avoidance depending on additional cues. Signals from animals dramatically larger than the shark, particularly when those signals arrive at intensities far above anything the hunting system can make use of, trigger a different response. Researchers studying predator decision-making across multiple species identified a consistent pattern they called scale overflow response. When an animal's sensory system receives input from a source so large that the normal prey-predator calculation cannot apply, the nervous system defaults to avoidance rather than approach. The signal is simply too big to process through the prey detection framework, so it reroutes to the threat detection pathway. For the great white, a blue whale's full sensory signature, pressure wave, acoustic pulse, bioelectric field, and chemical trace all arriving simultaneously, floods every channel at once. The shark's brain does not receive one overwhelmingly large signal. It receives multiple systems reporting maximum input at the same time. The result is a nervous system state that has no productive hunting outlet. The shark cannot hunt in these conditions. It cannot locate prey. It cannot hold position. Every sense is overwhelmed. In that state, the most functional available behavior is to exit the situation and find a zone where the systems return to normal operating range. What looks like fear from the outside is, at the neurological level, a predator doing the only thing that makes sense when every tool it uses to hunt has been rendered temporarily useless. The shark leaves to get back to a state where it can function, and what scientists discovered about how long that response persists, long after the whale is gone and the sensory environment has returned to normal, adds a dimension to great white cognition that marine biology is still catching up with. For most of the 20th century, the scientific consensus on shark cognition stayed simple. Sharks were reflex machines, input triggers, output, no learning, no memory, no carried experience shaping future behavior. They were described in textbooks as swimming stimulus response loops. That view has collapsed over the last 2 decades. The evidence arrived slowly, in small pieces from different research programs, until the weight of it made the old picture impossible to maintain. One of the clearest data points came from the Farallon Island studies, specifically from the timeline of shark returns after blue whale avoidance events. If sharks operated purely on reflex and lived entirely in the present, their return to abandoned territory after a whale's departure should be relatively fast. The threatening stimulus would be gone. The sensory environment would have returned to normal. The seal colony would still be there, actively signalling prey availability. A reflex-driven animal would return to optimal territory as soon as the negative stimulus cleared. That is not what happened. Sharks tracked via satellite tags after whale-driven departures returned to their prior territories, with a consistent lag of several days to over a week, even after acoustic monitoring confirmed that blue whale calls had dropped to background levels and whale sightings in the area had ended. The territory was safe, the seals were still there, the sharks stayed away. Some individual sharks showed even longer absences. One well-documented adult male did not return to his established Farallon territory for nearly 3 weeks after a blue whale presence event. For an animal operating purely on present moment reflex, this makes no sense. For an animal carrying a memory of what happened in that location, it makes complete sense. Separate laboratory research on lemon sharks and nurse sharks had already established that sharks can learn to associate specific locations, sounds and visual cues with positive and negative outcomes, and retain those associations for extended periods. Sharks trained to push a lever for food remembered the task a year later without reinforcement. Sharks that received a mild aversive stimulus in a specific area of their tank showed long-term avoidance of that area. Applied to the Farallon data, the interpretation is that individual great whites carry a location-specific memory of where a blue whale disruption occurred. That memory influences their willingness to return to the area even after the external signals have cleared. The location itself has been marked as associated with a high disruption event, and the shark applies a delay before trusting that the conditions are stable again. Researchers studying individual shark personalities across multiple seasons also found that the duration of post-whale absence varied between individual sharks. Some returned faster, some stayed away longer. This individual variation is another marker of learned, memory-based behaviour rather than uniform reflex. The great white shark is not the reflex machine of the old textbooks. It is an animal that learns from experience, carries that learning across weeks and potentially months, and applies it to future decisions about where to hunt and where to avoid. And what the ocean looks like without the blue whale's influence turns out to have shaped shark behaviour in ways that researchers only began to understand when the whale started coming back. The blue whale is not alone in triggering this response, and understanding the second animal on this list reveals something important about what the behaviour is actually based on. Sperm whales share almost nothing with blue whales in terms of biology and behaviour. They are toothed predators, not filter feeders. They hunt giant squid in water up to 10,000 feet deep. Their diet, anatomy and lifestyle are completely different. A sperm whale is roughly 60 feet long and weighs around 80,000 pounds, large but nowhere near blue whale scale. And yet tagged great white sharks show similar avoidance behaviour when sperm whales enter their range. The data on this is less comprehensive than the blue whale studies, but several research programs tracking sharks off the Azores and in the Pacific have documented departures from shark hunting zones correlated with sperm whale presence. The departures are not as dramatic as those triggered by blue whales. The distances covered are generally smaller, but the direction of the behavioural shift is the same. Sharks leave, whales arrive, sharks return when whales move on. This matters because it rules out a specific explanation for the blue whale response. If the avoidance were purely about blue whale size, the sperm whale should not trigger it. A sperm whale is large, but not catastrophically larger than a great white the way a blue whale is. A great white versus a sperm whale is a mismatch. but a sperm whale is not 60 times the shark's mass. What sperm whales and blue whales share is acoustic power. Sperm whales produce the loudest sounds of any toothed animal on Earth. Their clicks, used for echolocation in deep water, reach around 230 decibels at the source. Those clicks are directional, focused ahead of the whale, but the acoustic environment around a clicking sperm whale is still intensely loud by any measure a nearby shark's lateral line would process. The overlap between the two species that triggers shark avoidance appears to be acoustic output, not size alone. Both species generate sounds that overwhelm the shark's sensory systems. The mechanism is the same even though the animals are very different. This also means the behaviour in great whites is probably not specifically programmed for blue whales or sperm whales as individual species. It appears to be a generalised response to acoustic and sensory overwhelm from any sufficiently large marine mammal. The great white's nervous system responds to the magnitude of the signal, and any animal capable of generating signals at that magnitude triggers the same departure. The implication is interesting. As the populations of large whales recover from the severe hunting pressure of the 20th century, more of them are returning to oceanic zones where great whites operate, and the interaction between these animals across expanding ranges is beginning to show up in the shark data in ways that researchers are only now starting to map in full. Blue whale populations collapsed during the commercial whaling era of the 20th century. At the peak of industrial whaling, fleets targeting blue whales in the Southern Ocean and North Pacific reduced the global population from an estimated 250,000 animals to somewhere around 5,000 to 10,000 individuals by the 1960s. The population dropped by roughly 96% in under a century. The effect on the ocean was not just the removal of the whales, it was the removal of everything the whales did to the ocean. The acoustic environment changed. The chemical signals that blue whales spread through their migration corridors disappeared. The pressure displacement and bioelectric fields that had been part of the ocean's sensory landscape for millions of years went quiet across vast stretches of water. Researchers analysing historical records of great white shark distribution found something striking when they compared pre-whaling, peak whaling, and post-whaling shark distribution data. During the period when blue whale populations were at their lowest, great white sharks showed expanded territorial ranges in regions where blue whales had historically been abundant. The sharks moved into areas that previously carried sustained blue whale presence. This is consistent with what the avoidance behaviour research would predict. Remove the whales, remove the sensory signal that displaced the sharks, and the sharks expand into the newly unoccupied sensory territory. Now, with partial blue whale recovery underway under international protection, the whale population has grown to an estimated 10,000 to 25,000 individuals, a fraction of historic numbers but a significant recovery from the near-extinction low point. And blue whales have begun returning to migration corridors they used historically before the whaling era. Researchers tracking both species simultaneously have found evidence of great white sharks showing avoidance behaviour in areas where blue whale presence had been absent for decades. The whales are moving back into corridors, and the sharks are showing the ancient response again, pulling back from zones with increasing whale acoustic activity. One particular corridor along the California coast near the Channel Islands showed this pattern clearly. Historical records suggested blue whales moved through this area before intensive whaling. During the mid-20th century, blue whale presence there dropped nearly to zero. Shark activity in the area was high. As blue whale recovery has brought animals back through the region in recent decades, researchers have documented increasing acoustic signal in the area and corresponding changes in the shark distribution data nearby. The ocean is reorganising around the return of its largest animal, and the pattern that reorganisation follows is millions of years old, written into both species before human activity ever disrupted it. The sharks remember, at the level of evolutionary programming, what blue whale signals mean, even generations removed from the period when those signals were common. But the full picture of what this reorganisation means for ocean ecosystems goes deeper than just where sharks and whales happen to swim. A blue whale's passage through the ocean leaves a trail, not a visible one, not a path you could follow with your eyes, but a chemical corridor that hangs in the water for hours after the whale has moved on, readable by any animal with the right sensory equipment. Blue whales, like all large marine mammals, continuously release biological material into the water around them. Slowed skin cells, respiratory mucus exhaled through the blowhole at the water's surface, fecal plumes, which can be enormous since a blue whale processing 4 tons of krill daily produces proportionally large waste volumes, metabolic byproducts that diffuse through the skin into the surrounding water, hormonal compounds that shift with the whale's physiological state. Scientists studying the chemical ecology of cetaceans collected water samples from areas where blue whales had been swimming and analysed the molecular contents. The samples contained a specific combination of lipids, proteins, and chemical compounds unique to large baleen whales. These compounds do not appear in the water in the same concentrations without whale presence. They are a chemical fingerprint, specific enough that researchers could distinguish blue whale water from humpback whale water based on molecular composition alone. Great white sharks moving through ocean water read this chemical landscape continuously. Their olfactory system, built for extraordinary sensitivity, samples the water with every breath that passes through the nostrils. The chemical gradient of the blue whale's trail increases in concentration as the shark moves toward where the whale has been. It decreases as the shark moves away. The shark uses this gradient the same way it would use any chemical signal to determine direction and distance from the source. With prey, the shark moves toward increasing concentration. With the blue whale's chemical signature, researchers found through controlled experiments that sharks consistently moved away from increasing concentrations. The compounds in blue whale biological material that trigger this response appear to include specific lipid signatures associated with very large body mass. Some researchers have proposed that the ratio of certain fatty acid compounds in large cetacean tissue and secretions carries information about body size that a predator's olfactory system can read. Larger animals have different metabolic profiles than smaller ones, and those profiles express themselves in the chemical compounds their bodies produce. A great white's olfactory system evolved over millions of years of coexistence with large whales. Whether through explicit programming or through the gradual elimination of sharks that approached blue whale chemical signatures and suffered for it, the modern great white appears to carry a learned at the species level aversion to those specific compounds. This means the whale's influence extends through the ocean, along every current that carries its chemical trail. A great white sitting in water that a blue whale passed through hours ago is already receiving a signal. The whale is gone, but the water still speaks. And what happens to the chemicals released by a blue whale that has been frightened or stressed? A state that produces a different hormonal and metabolic output reaches even further into questions that scientists are still working to answer. Adult great white sharks are the animals most people picture. The large, scarred individuals, long-range travellers, experienced hunters. These are the sharks that show up in the satellite tag studies that researchers recognise by their unique fin notches across multiple seasons that demonstrate the complex territorial behaviour and memory-based avoidance responses described throughout this story. Juvenile great whites are different, younger, smaller, less experienced. And when researchers compared the avoidance behaviour of young sharks against adult sharks in response to blue whale signals, the juveniles showed a stronger response by measurable margins. A juvenile great white, roughly 6 to 10 feet long and weighing between 300 and 800 pounds, is in a completely different physical relationship with a blue whale than a 20-foot adult is. The size gap is even more extreme. The sensory overwhelm from the whale's acoustic and pressure output is proportionally larger relative to the juvenile's body. A pressure wave that floods the lateral line of a large adult floods a smaller animal system even more completely. But the stronger avoidance in juveniles is not simply about body size relative to the whale. Researchers found that juvenile great whites showed earlier departures from zones with blue whale acoustic signals, fled at greater distances, and stayed away longer than the adults in comparable situations. One interpretation is straightforward risk sensitivity. Juvenile sharks have not yet reached the size where their survival toolkit is fully developed. A large adult great white has mass, speed, and battle-tested reflexes on its side, even when its hunting senses are overwhelmed. It can afford slightly more exposure to a disrupted sensory environment because its physical capabilities provide some buffer. A juvenile does not have that buffer. Every tool it depends on for survival is less developed, which means the consequences of sensory disruption are proportionally more severe. A second interpretation involves the role of learning. Juvenile sharks in their early years are in a critical period for building behavioural repertoire. Research on juvenile shark learning found that young sharks form associations between environmental cues and outcomes faster and more strongly than adults in some contexts, a pattern seen in many species where early learning shapes lifelong behaviour. A juvenile that encounters a blue whale signal and responds by leaving, and then successfully avoids harm by doing so, reinforces the behaviour more strongly than an adult whose established behavioural patterns are harder to update. This could explain why juvenile avoidance responses appear somewhat more automatic and complete than adult responses. The behaviour is being written deeply into the animal's behavioural architecture during a phase when such writing is most efficient. Researchers studying juvenile great white habitat using the Southern California Bight, a shallow coastal zone where young great whites are common, found that juveniles in this region showed habitat selection patterns that kept them consistently away from blue whale feeding corridors even when those corridors offered adjacent prey-rich zones. The juveniles were choosing slightly lower quality hunting areas in exchange for staying out of the blue whale acoustic zone. That trade-off, better safety over better hunting, is a calculation that juveniles appear to make more reliably than adults, and it tells you something about where this behaviour lives in the shark's hierarchy of priorities. A blue whale does not produce one kind of sound. It has a repertoire, calls that appear during migration, calls associated with social contact, calls produced during feeding, and calls whose function researchers are still working to understand. Each of these has a distinct acoustic signature, a specific frequency range, duration, and pattern that separates it from the others. The calls produced during active feeding differ from the whale's baseline vocalizations in measurable ways. Feeding calls tend to be shorter in duration, occur in quicker succession, and carry different frequency modulation patterns than the long sweeping tones of the whale's signature songs. Researchers using underwater microphones positioned near feeding blue whales recorded these calls and compared them against the animal's behavioural state confirmed through surface observation and drone footage. The feeding calls peak in intensity during the final approach before a lunge, when the whale is accelerating toward a krill cloud with its mouth beginning to open. At that moment, the whale's call output reaches its highest volume and its pattern shifts toward rapid, lower frequency pulses. For a great white shark in the vicinity, this matters because the feeding call represents the moment of maximum acoustic output from the whale. The pressure waves arriving through the water are at their most intense exactly when the whale is moving fastest. The combination of movement-generated pressure wave and peak vocal output creates the highest sensory load a nearby shark will experience. Researchers monitoring tagged shark behaviour during blue whale feeding events found that the sharpest avoidance responses in nearby sharks coincided with these feeding call sequences. A blue whale calling at its migration baseline was disruptive to sharks in the area. A blue whale in active feeding mode, calling at peak intensity while accelerating through a krill patch, triggered faster and more extreme departures. The timing of this matters. Great whites and blue whales sometimes occupy the same coastal zones because the same upwelling conditions that concentrate krill near the surface also concentrate fish and marine mammals that the sharks hunt. A productive patch of cold, nutrient-rich water is valuable to both animals for completely different reasons. When a blue whale enters one of these shared productive zones and begins feeding, its acoustic output peaks at exactly the moment the zone's value for great white hunting is also highest. The effect is a forced choice for the shark. Stay in productive territory and endure the worst acoustic environment possible, or leave and find somewhere quieter but less rich in prey. The data consistently shows which choice the sharks make. Some researchers have proposed that this dynamic, large whales displacing sharks from the richest feeding zones precisely when the whales are most actively feeding there, has shaped the distribution of prey species in those zones over millions of years. The presence of blue whales feeding in an upwelling zone may actually allow prey fish populations to partially recover in the whale's immediate area, creating a pocket of protection around the whale's feeding path that its acoustic signature maintains without any deliberate intent. The shark avoids the sound. The fish in the sound's radius benefit. The whale eats krill and never knows any of this is happening around it. Place a blue whale and a great white shark in the same square mile of open ocean. Both animals are there. The whale is feeding or migrating, the shark is hunting or patrolling. What does that square mile actually look and feel like, from an underwater perspective, in the minutes before the shark decides to leave? The whale arrives first in the shark's awareness as a sound. Low, powerful pulses arriving through the water from a distance that could be several miles. The shark's lateral line picks up the pressure component while its inner ear structures respond to the acoustic component. Both systems fire simultaneously. The shark does not alter course immediately, but its behavior shifts. It becomes less committed to its hunting pattern, wider in its circles, more variable in its depth. Then the pressure wave arrives. The whale is closer now, within a mile, and its bow wave reaches the shark as a physical push through the water. The lateral line, already elevated from the acoustic signal, responds to the pressure front. The shark's movement becomes reactive rather than purposeful. It adjusts position in response to the pressure the same way you adjust your balance when a wave catches you unexpectedly. Then the electrical field reaches it. The blue whale's bioelectric signature, radiating from its enormous heart and musculature, spreads through the water and begins saturating the shark's electroreception. The precision the shark uses to locate and target prey degrades. The electrical landscape stops making useful sense. The shark cannot find a clean target signal in the noise. The chemical trace has been present throughout, carried on the current from the whale's path through the water. The shark has been reading it from the beginning as a signal associated with something large, something its olfactory system does not process as prey. All four sensory channels converge on the same conclusion. Something enormous is approaching. The environment cannot support a successful hunt. Every system is reporting noise instead of a useful signal. The shark goes down. It drops below the surface layer where the acoustic pressure is strongest, and where the whale's bow wave has the most force. It reorients horizontally, pointing away from the whale's direction of travel. It begins swimming fast, well above its normal cruising pace, covering distance rather than searching for prey. Above it, the blue whale continues on course. It calls, it lunges, it feeds. Its flukes sweep a tremendous arc through the water with each stroke. The trailing turbulence it leaves behind churns for minutes. The chemical trail it releases spreads on the current. The square mile the two animals briefly shared is now dominated by one of them entirely. The other is already hundreds of feet deeper and moving away. On the surface, everything looks calm. The water is the same colour. The waves are the same. A person on a boat would see nothing unusual. Below, one of the most ancient sensory relationships in ocean life has just played out exactly as it has for millions of years. And scientists studying it now are realizing that the consequences of this relationship reach further than the two animals themselves. When a great white shark leaves its territory the moment a blue whale's acoustic signal arrives, what exactly is happening inside the animal? 3 different explanations exist in the literature, and researchers have not fully settled on one. The first is classical fear. The shark detects a signal associated with something massively larger and more powerful than itself. and the neural response that fires is the same kind of fear response documented in mammals and birds when they detect a predator. The amygdala equivalent in the shark's brain triggers an alarm state, and the animal flees. The challenge with this explanation is that fear, in the strict biological sense, requires an animal to have a model of threat, a representation of the other animal as something capable of harm. Whether a shark carries that kind of representational model is debated. The shark has not, as far as researchers can confirm, watched a blue whale harm another shark. It does not have social learning to draw on. Its experience of the blue whale is entirely through sensory signals, not through observed outcomes. The second explanation is pure instinct. The shark's nervous system is hardwired to respond to signals above a certain magnitude by leaving. No evaluation, no representation of threat, no anything that resembles fear in the way we experience it, just a magnitude threshold that, when exceeded, triggers a departure response that was selected for over millions of generations. The challenge with this explanation is the memory component. Pure reflex-based instinct should produce uniform, immediate responses that reset quickly. The Farallon data showed that sharks stayed away from their territories for days after the whale-related signals cleared, with individual variation in how long different sharks waited. That individual variation and extended delay period is inconsistent with a simple reflex loop. The third explanation sits between the other two, a functional calculation in which the shark's brain processes the cost-benefit balance of staying versus leaving, and arrives at a predictable outcome given the magnitude of the disruption. This explanation does not require the shark to consciously fear the whale, or to have a model of what the whale could do to it. It only requires the shark's nervous system to weigh sensory disruption against hunting opportunity and exit when the disruption cost is too high. This framework fits the data best. It explains the avoidance response without requiring mammalian-style fear. It explains the extended absence through a recalculation period in which the shark does not return until signals confirm conditions have stabilized. And it leaves room for individual variation based on differences in each shark's prior experience with the disruption. What it does not answer is where exactly the line falls between a functional calculation and something that deserves to be called a decision. And that question, about what is actually happening in the mind of a great white shark, is one that marine biologists admit they cannot fully answer yet. What they can answer is what happens to the ocean when you remove the animals that keep this calculation running. Before the blue whale avoidance research became clear, marine biologists modelled ocean predator territory using a fairly straightforward set of variables: prey availability, water temperature, depth profiles, seasonal migration patterns. Put those factors together for a given species and you could predict, with reasonable accuracy, where the predators would be and when. The blue whale avoidance data broke that model. The problem was that a critical variable had been missing from the calculations entirely: acoustic and sensory environment. Researchers had been modelling where prey was and assuming predators would follow prey. They had not been modelling whether the sensory conditions in a given zone actually allowed the predator to hunt effectively. When you include sensory environment as a variable, the predictions change. A zone with abundant prey but high acoustic disruption from large whale activity is not simply a productive zone for great white sharks. It is a zone with high prey density and low hunting efficiency. Whether the shark uses the zone depends on which of those two factors outweighs the other, and the balance shifts depending on whale presence. This insight forced a revision of how researchers build predator distribution models. The new generation of models for great white territory includes acoustic monitoring data as an input, overlaying whale call density maps with prey availability maps to produce a more accurate prediction of where sharks will actually concentrate. The models also changed how researchers interpret historical distribution data. Gaps in shark presence at seemingly productive locations, data points that previously got explained away as noise or incomplete sampling, can now be re-examined through the lens of whale presence. Some of those gaps now have explanations that the old model could not offer. Beyond great whites, the finding pushed marine ecologists to reconsider how acoustic and sensory environments shape the distribution of apex predators across ocean ecosystems more broadly. Tiger sharks, bull sharks, oceanic white-tip sharks all share water with various large cetaceans. Researchers who had not been looking for analogous avoidance behaviours in those species began looking, and early findings suggest the pattern may extend further than great whites alone. The discovery also has conservation implications. Ocean noise pollution from shipping, sonar, seismic surveys, and industrial activity has increased dramatically over the last century. Researchers studying the effects of this noise on whale behaviour documented significant changes in whale calling patterns, migration routes, and feeding efficiency under high noise conditions. If whale acoustic behaviour drives predator distribution, then anything that disrupts whale acoustics may have cascading effects on how ocean predators use their habitat. A shipping lane running through a historically quiet whale migration corridor does not just affect the whales, it potentially changes the acoustic landscape that has been regulating predator distribution in that entire region for millions of years. The ripples extend outward in ways the old models were never built to track. Scientists are now building tools specifically designed to map these acoustic ripple effects, and the relationship between blue whales and great whites is the case study that made the need for those tools undeniable. The blue whale hunting years did something that had never happened in the millions of years of shared ocean history between these two species. They removed the signal. For tens of millions of years, the acoustic and sensory presence of very large whales was a constant feature of the ocean. The blue whale's call, its pressure displacement, its chemical trace drifting on currents, these were part of the ocean environment the same way water temperature and salinity are. They were background conditions that the ocean's predators had evolved inside of. Then, in the span of about 60 years, industrial whaling removed 96% of the blue whales. The ocean went quiet in a way it had not been for millions of years. Great white sharks, whose behavioural programming included deep avoidance responses tied to blue whale signals, suddenly found themselves in an ocean where those signals were almost entirely absent. What did the sharks do? The data from this period is incomplete because systematic shark tagging did not begin until after the whaling era's peak. But researchers working backward through historical records of shark presence, fishing catch data, and coastal observation logs found evidence that great white distribution expanded into areas that historical accounts suggested had been consistently avoided before the whaling era. One research paper analysing long-term data from the northeastern Pacific found that great white presence in certain offshore zones increased significantly through the mid-20th century compared to records from the 19th and early 20th centuries. The timing aligned with the period of maximum blue whale depletion in the region. Now the recovery is creating the reverse dynamic. As blue whale populations rebuild and individuals return to historical migration corridors, the ancient signal is returning to water that has been quiet for 2 to 3 generations of great white sharks. And the sharks are responding to it even though the individual animals alive today have never experienced it before. This is one of the clearest demonstrations of how deep the avoidance behaviour goes. The sharks responding to recovered blue whale presence were born into an ocean without those signals. No individual learning could have prepared them for it. The response comes from somewhere older than individual experience, from the evolutionary programming laid down across millions of generations when the signal was a constant feature of the environment. Researchers tracking this dynamic in real time describe it as watching an ancient relationship reboot. The whales return to a corridor. The acoustic data shows increasing call density. The shark tag data shows corresponding shifts in distribution, departures from the zones with rising whale presence, relocations to alternative territories. The ocean is remembering a relationship it nearly lost, and what that relationship actually does to the broader ecosystem, beyond the two animals themselves, turns out to be one of the most important things marine science is currently working to understand. Pull back far enough, and the relationship between great whites and blue whales stops being a story about one predator and one prey-indifferent giant. It becomes a story about how the largest living things on Earth quietly organize everything around them without awareness of the effect they are producing. A blue whale swimming through its migration corridor does not know it is displacing a great white shark. It does not know it is creating a temporary refuge for the seals and fish in its acoustic radius. It does not know that its chemical trail is reorganizing the chemical landscape of a stretch of ocean for hours after its passage. It is feeding. It is migrating. It is calling to other blue whales across distances that span ocean basins. And yet the effects stack up. Great whites displaced from productive hunting zones by blue whale presence relocate to alternative territories. Those alternative territories then experience higher predation pressure. The zones around blue whale feeding corridors, with reduced shark presence, experience lower predation pressure. Prey populations in those zones can recover slightly, or maintain higher densities than they would under continuous predation. The krill the whales eat produce waste that fertilizes the water column, which feeds phytoplankton, which oxygenates the ocean and feeds the base of the food chain. The blue whale, by simply existing and moving through the ocean, creates patterns that ripple through multiple layers of the ecosystem simultaneously. Its size drives predator displacement. Its feeding drives nutrient cycling. Its calls shape where other animals can and cannot function effectively. It is not doing any of this intentionally. It is simply being the largest animal that has ever lived. Scientists call this kind of effect ecosystem engineering. The animal changes its habitat by existing in it, and those changes benefit other species in ways that extend far beyond the animal's own needs. Beavers are the classic example on land. In the ocean, blue whales may be doing something comparable at a planetary scale. The great white shark's avoidance response is one thread in this larger web. When researchers began following that thread, pulling on the data from the Farallon Islands and the California coastlines and the acoustic monitoring networks, they found it connected to predator distribution across entire ocean basins, to historical whale population dynamics, to prey recovery patterns, to acoustic ecology, and to fundamental questions about how the ocean's food web actually organizes itself. One marine ecologist described the blue whale as a moving keystone, an animal so large that its presence restructures the relationships around it wherever it goes. Remove it, as the whaling era did, and the web reorganizes around the gap. Bring it back, as recovery is beginning to do, and the old patterns re-emerge. The great white shark fleeing from a blue whale signal is not a story about weakness. It is a story about how a system that has taken tens of millions of years to build contains logic so deep that even near total destruction of one of its components could not erase it. The ocean remembered, the sharks remembered, and the giants, slowly, are coming back.